Okay, a giant in the field of art and architecture. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, born in 1598 and died in 1680. Let's read a little bit about him. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, he was born on December 7th and died on the 28th of November 1680, was an Italian sculptor and architect. While a major figure in the world of architecture, he was more preeminently the leading sculptor of his age, credited with creating the Baroque style of sculpture. As one scholar has commented, what Shakespeare is to drama, Bernini may be to sculpture. This is quite a statement. The first pan-European sculptor whose name is instantaneously identifiable with a particular manner and vision, and whose influence was inordinately powerful. In addition, he was a painter, mostly small canvases in oil, and a man of the theater. He wrote, directed, and acted in plays, mostly carnival satires, for which he designed stage sets and theatrical machinery. He produced designs as well for a wide variety of decorative art objects, including lamps, tables, mirrors, and even coaches. As an architect and city planner, he designed secular buildings, churches, chapels, and public squares, as well as massive works combining both architecture and sculpture, especially elaborate public fountains and funerary monuments, and the whole series of temporary structures in stucco and wood for funerals and festivals. His broad technical versatility, boundless compositional inventiveness, and sheer skill in manipulating marble ensured that he would be considered a worthy successor of Michelangelo, far outshining other sculptors of his generation. His talent extended beyond the confines of sculpture to a consideration of the setting in which it would be situated. His ability to synthesize sculpture, painting, and architecture into a coherent conceptual and visual whole has been termed by the late art historian Irving Lavin the unity of the visual arts. Quite an introduction to Bernini. This was the man, a self-portrait, and I would say he was even beautiful. And yes, I understand my assessment is based on a romantic view of art. And yes, it's easy to idealize someone like Bernini. But if we don't idealize someone like Bernini, whom are we going to idealize? Although shadows in life are always present, there was an enmity even between him and Borromini. And apparently Bernini was more capable of negotiating with society. He lived a long and very successful life, while Borromini committed suicide at 67, I think. And some even think that he committed suicide because of the rivalry he had with Bernini. Anyway, so Gian Lorenzo Bernini, a drawing by him as a young man, and here he is in older age. It is my belief that we need heroes and we need mentors. And if someone like Bernini doesn't exalt us, I don't know who. Here he is already an aristocrat in older age of highly accomplished in art and in architecture. And when I say art, I mean various fields of art. Some drawings by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Of course, he drew impeccably. Most masters of that time drew very, very well. They didn't have cameras. They didn't have, filming gadgets and so on. So they drew. Goethe said that we do not see something unless we draw that something. I don't know if it's the same thing if you take a picture of something or if you draw that something with your own hand. I don't know. Anyway, why did I think of talking about Frank Gehry today? Because Frank Gehry declared that he was inspired by Bernini, and I will try to say why, in what way, and perhaps one of the most direct and explicit ways to address this question is, contemplating the Baroque artistry of Bernini, not so apparent in his self-portraits, but very apparent, particularly in his sculpture. Now let's look at some paintings. So we saw some drawings. Now we are going to see some paintings. He also painted, in a superlative way. He was an artist through and through, the quintessential artist. He was not a businessman. Well, who knows? I mean, these people also had a so-called real life, which they had to address. But we know of them because of their art, because of what they left behind. And, they were essentially artists. That's what they were. And this is what Bernini was as well. Now, sculpture. Sculpture for Gian Lorenzo Bernini was his main medium, just like it was in the case of Michelangelo. But his sculpture is very different from the one of Michelangelo. And this is done in stone. And it's astonishing to be able to do something like this in stone. He built very important fountains in Rome, and I hope I have them here in this presentation. I have another presentation with fountains of Rome, and those of Bernini are truly magnificent. Not just those in Piazza Navona, but also in other parts of Rome. There is life here, there is drama, there is the tumultuousness of emotions expressed through stone. David, who was sculpted by other sculptors as well, including Michelangelo, but the one by Bernini is, more, in a way, emotionally charged and more dynamic. The Baroque sculptor, the Baroque artist, this is what he was good at. Look at the posture, the engagement with we are talking about one of the best sculptors of the world. Now, what we see here is in a way a fragment of a building by Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry declared that he was inspired by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and he was indeed. Look at this. Look, you could almost say that this is flesh, but it's actually stone. Look at the fingers that touch, this leg, and it's amazing. It becomes soft. The stone becomes soft. And the hand is perfectly sculpted, and not just the hand, of course. Now fountains. Fontana del Tritone in Rome. I think fountains add a lot to a city, and I think a city that is wise enough to invest in fountains will have only benefits at all levels. They humanize an urban space. They fresh the air. They they are events, artistic and architectonic events, and we need fountains. The more, the better. Rome has a lot, and some splendid fountains, and Bernini contributed significantly in the field of fountains. Now look at these buildings and look at the statue or the sculpture. You know, it's water, it's the movement of the water, it's the liquidity of the water, and then there is the stone. And but the stone, which is animated itself by some kind of a fluidity, the fluidity of the Baroque artist. Fountain of the Four Rivers in Rome is a great masterpiece. I mean, if he did just this work, and he would have deserved to be known and revered, just this work. But this is one of the many works he did. Piazza Navona. These works are truly milestones of Baroque art and of art in general. Maybe I shouldn't even say Baroque. This is art at its best. More alive than life itself. It is this movement, this incredible movement that animated, I'm sure, Frank Gehry when he tried to do an architecture that is equally emphatic in expressing dynamic forces and movement. Fountain of the Moor, also in Rome. The Elephant and the Obelisk in Rome. This I'm not sure if he sculpted it, but it was done based on drawings or the project of Bernini. There is an obelisk on top of an elephant. Of course, in order to do all these works, he also employed assistants or other sculptors who brought to fruition his visions. Now, architecture. St. Peter's Square in Rome from 1656 to 1667. So this was done in 11 years in the 17th century. So we are talking about this. This was done by Bernini, and it's an integral part of you know, this whole complex, with culminating with St. Peter's. But what Bernini added in front of the entrance into the great Christian building is equally important and significant. In this square, you know, it is filled with people on Easter or Christmas, or the important events, religious events of Christianity. I don't know if he did these sculptures as well. It's possible. He also worked inside San Pietro, and we are going to see what. Sant'Andrea al Quirinale. Look at this ceiling. It is, I mean, you know, some of these buildings were built not just by him in collaboration with other architects and artists, but you know, the parts he accomplished are immensely important for the history of architecture. He did also the elevation. Yes, it's Roman Baroque art or architecture or both, but it's not yesterday we talked about Sansovino, where it's a different sensibility in Venice compared to Rome. In Rome, you know, there is even, well, we cannot say an austere Baroque art or architecture, but it's more, less decorative, less ornamental. Yes, there are some ornaments here, but otherwise the building is almost so-called classical. It has dignity. The ellipse of the plan means Baroque. The ellipse was also employed brilliantly in San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane by his rival, Francesco Borromini. It seems here is Saint Andrew, no? Crucified on the X of the cross. In 2 days, it will be his day. The incredible exaltation of all these sculptures and the whole ambiance, the architecture of the building, this is really about exaltation. You know, without an exalted spirit, how could you aspire towards the above? Now the baldacchino, I said that I will show also the work he did inside San Pietro. This is a famous work by him, the baldachin, and you know, it's an amazing work. I mean, just these columns, look how he twisted them and you know, contorted them, and you wonder why. why did he complicate himself? Well, why did God complicate himself when he created life? Why didn't God created a minimalist nature or a minimalist life, human existence, and not just human, with everybody composed of squares and rectangles, both, animals and humans and plants, everything to be done minimalistically and simplistically. Why is it that it was not done in this way? Are we asking ourselves this question? Palazzo Barberini, here he worked with Maderno and Borromini, his rival. As you can see, the Roman Baroque is rather restrained, with some exceptions. We saw those exceptions in the interior of the church we just saw, but towards the exterior, this is, with some difficulties, in my opinion, should be called Baroque architecture. Scalone del Bernini, it's a staircase. This is by him, and this is by Borromini. Borromini. Palazzo Montecitorio, completed by Carlo Fontana, another important architect. Santa Bibiana Church, the main facade, he did just the facade here. As you can see, this is really a restrained Baroque, if we can call it a Baroque at all. San Tommaso da Villanova in Castel Gandolfo, quite an austere facade for the quintessential Baroque artist and architect. Although in some respects, in architecture at least, Borromini was probably more of a Baroque architect than Bernini. Although in the interior, yes, he was, because of the ornamental side of his work. Santa Maria Assunta in Aricia. This is quite an interesting building, and somehow anticipating the neoclassical visionary architecture in France with Ledoux and Boulez. Almost modern somehow. Not so much the interior, but the cylinder, the geometry of the cylinder in its primal force, I would say, is almost modern. A very accomplished artist, one of the most accomplished, and in various fields: drawing, theater, painting, sculpture, architecture, you name it. He did it all. Now, this is a very important work by him. We already saw a picture or so, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa in the Cornaro Chapel, Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. It's one of his most, yes, prestigious sculptural works. And again, what we see here is, I'm sure Frank Gehry found inspiration in this and some of his buildings, and his stage design for theater or opera were almost literal, not copies, but they were literally inspired by what we look at here. To express ecstasy in stone the way Bernini did is not easy at all. And look at the expression of Cupid. Cupid, you wonder, with it looks with some the kindness towards Teresa, Saint Teresa. Look at this hand. This is unbelievably real in stone. Now, who says that architecture is not art? Well, if we look at this, what else is it if not art? It's not just, yes, we looked at a specific sculptural work, but the whole conception of this space belongs to art. And all the arts contribute to its artistry: painting, sculpture, architecture. There is even death here on the pavement. A reminder, if we need one. Bernini and the art of fluid deformation. Perhaps that's exactly what attracted someone like Frank Gehry towards Bernini, the art of fluid deformation. And this is the last picture of this, presentation on Bernini. And I would say that this fluid deformation that we look at here, this is very, very modern, I mean, this kind of deformations can be found in the works of the contemporary architect we know by the name Frank Gehry. And I'm going to show some works by him next. When I was preparing this material, I came across this picture. This is not with Frank Gehry, but in a way it's about deformation. It's about the artist who goes, the other way or the opposite way. When everybody is standing up in the so-called normal or natural way, the artist prefers the opposite. So in a way, it's about the opposition between art and life, although art inspires itself from life. And sometimes life copies art. Like, for example, I read that in Onegin, Alexander Pushkin, the great Russian poet, he depicted the case of a poet, actually, who became jealous because his wife flirted with I don't know, an ambassador, and provoked that ambassador to a duel, and the poet dies, is shot. And Alexander Pushkin wrote Onegin 2 years before exactly the same thing happened to him. His wife flirted with, or the French ambassador to Russia flirted with his wife. He provoked the poet, meaning Alexander Pushkin, provoked him to a duel. They went into the forest and he got shot and he was killed. And I wonder if Pushkin didn't reflect on the fact that he anticipated through his art what was going to happen to him, to himself, 2 years later. So it's like an example where art precedes life, or life copies art. We think usually the other way around, that art copies life, but there are cases where actually life copies art. Frank Gehry was born in with this name, so this is a created name, Frank Gehry. He was named Ephraim. Actually, I loved his first name, Ephraim. I wonder why he didn't keep it. Owen Goldberg in Toronto, Canada. His father, Irving, had a heart attack and, seeking an easier winter, moved the family to Los Angeles. In 1947, they became US citizens, and Ephraim, I really like his name much more than Frank. Ephraim. Adopted, in fact, I feel now tempted to see him almost differently through the prism of this first name that he originally had. Adopted the first name Frank in his 20s. Goldberg drove a delivery truck while taking courses at Los Angeles City College. Bravo to him. He is now one of the most successful architects ever, but just like Tadao Ando, he drove a truck, a delivery truck when he was young. He took architecture and became enthralled with the possibility of the art, although at first he found himself challenged. Sympathetic teachers and an early encounter with modernist architect Rafael Soriano confirmed his choice. He married Anita Schneider in 1952, and they honeymooned at John Lautner's Desert Hall Springs Motel, a work which I showed in my presentation about John Lautner's. He won an architecture scholarship to the University of Southern California and graduated in 1954. So remember, he was born in Canada, in Toronto. Later that year, he changed his last name from Goldberg to Gehry under pressure from his wife. Gehry worked full-time for the Los Angeles firm of Victor Gruen Associates, where he had apprenticed as a student in 1952 and later served in the Air Force. Gehry entered the Harvard Graduate School of Design for City Planning. He returned to Los Angeles without completing the degree and briefly joined the firm of Pereira and Luckman before returning to Victor Gruen. Gehry got restless. He took Anita, his wife, and their 2 children to Paris, where he spent a year working in the office of the French architect André Remodeling and studying the work of Le Corbusier. Gehry returned to Los Angeles from Paris in 1962 and established with Greg Walsh what became known as Gehry Partners. In the late 70s, Gehry found a creative outlet in rebuilding his own home, converting what he called the dumb little house with charm into a showplace for a radically new style. His Santa Monica neighbors were not happy at all, but Gehry's unusual house attracted serious critical attention, and he began to employ more imaginative elements in his commercial work. His international reputation was confirmed with the 1989 Pritzker Prize, the world's most prestigious architecture award. Philip Johnson helped Gehry become the most visible of an elite group of highly publicized architects. Gehry's most spectacular designs were the 1997 Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, and the 2004 Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown Los Angeles. He made a 2005 animated guest appearance on The Simpsons. In 2006, Gehry was the subject of a documentary, Sketches of Frank Gehry. At a press conference in Spain in October 2014, Gehry declared, "Let me tell you one thing. In the world we live in, 98% of what gets built and designed today is pure shit. There is no sense of design, no respect for humanity or anything. They are bad buildings and that's it." Bio adapted from whatever achievement and Wikipedia. Here is the man. I will go rather quickly because we have 500 pictures to look at, which is quite a lot. Here we see the model of his tower built in the south of France in Arles. He's 90, I forgot in what year he was born, but he's at least 93 years old. Anyway, and still kicking, still building, still imagining, and still he was immensely successful. I'm sure he had his share of disappointments, like all of us, and his face here seems to show it. But all in all, we can say his life was a success. This one I read. Here he is. This is one of the latest creations. He worked for the Hennessy, what is it, a cognac. Anyway, he designed the bottle, and you see the relationship with the Teresa sculpture or statue by Bernini. Drawings. But all his drawings are very different, of course, from the drawings of Bernini. But he didn't live in the 17th century. He lives still in the 21st century and the 20th century. So the anxiety of living in the 20th century and 21st century is shown in his sketches. But what is amazing is that these sketches became buildings. You know, I mean, yes, it's known he has a factory. I mean, he has a NASA laboratory. He has an immensely sophisticated technology at his disposal and very talented, you know, employees or colleagues who help him realize this vision he has about architecture. Although he has adversaries too. One of his adversaries is Kenneth Frampton, who doesn't like what he's doing at all. He thinks that this is a morbid architecture. Well, we can talk about that. Anyway, an interesting case, an interesting architect, and he never gave up on his vision. But when he began, he began with very different kinds of buildings. Like, for example, look at this. Would you say that this is a Frank Gehry building? Not really at all. But he struggled, of course, at the beginning was, you know, trying to survive and to, you know, to build whatever came to him. There are buildings in the early phase of his career which are very different from what we know of Frank Gehry. But this chair is by him. He designed it, and I think some of his pieces of furniture are remarkable. So again, I go rather quickly because we have 600 pictures, so a lot. 1959, the Edgar and Mary Lou Steves residence in Los Angeles, a larger building, modernistic, all right, but still not yet the paradigmatic Frank Gehry. Touches of postmodernism, what can we say, although a little early for postmodernism in 1960s. The apartments from 1962, the Klein Residence, Bel Air, 1963. I don't even know if all these buildings still exist, but these are the early works of Frank Gehry. I have to remember his original first name, which I like very much, imbued as it was with the past, if I can say so. I like that building, that name a lot. Los Angeles, again, other apartment. Now, again, would you call this Frank Gehry? If you saw them, almost surely you would have not associated this building with Frank Gehry. That's how he built at that time. It took him a while until he, became more extravagant. But this building, in my opinion, has an impressive, almost minimalist aesthetics, and I think it's very well done. Maybe Greg Walsh and Fred Usher, who worked with him for this, had a role in this, I don't know. But there is a considerable skill here in the name of a restrained modernism. Other apartments. So 1970, we are approaching the time when he built that, private, well, an addition. He provoked a change in his own home, and which attracted a lot of attention. The Harper House condos from 1976. Banal work, commercial work. Yes, he did it. He did it. Who would have thought that, from here he would arrive at what he did some years later? Nobody. 1976. But he was always attracted to art and to artists. Look here, there are already, insinuations of a new kind of aesthetic. And there is a sign here towards what later was to be called deconstruction. Here. And this will be seen very soon in his own apartment, his own house. This one from 1977. So he did this one in 1976. And in remember this part. And now we go to, truly, it was the starting point for a new life for him as an architect. The Frank Gehry Residence remodeling. He remodeled it in 1977, his own house in Santa Monica, California. You see already he's fragmenting, he's deconstructing, and thus he brings a sense of dynamic movement. Any movement should be dynamic, but here is, not yet an exacerbated, movement or dynamism, but moving in that direction. It is as if he was trying to recreate architecture by bringing chaos, or it's not yet chaos here, but moving somehow in that direction to create a new architecture by first deconstructing the existing one. His own house, 1977, in Santa Monica, California. Essentially, his house was like this, like what you see here. But you can see here a dramatic change, or almost dramatic. Seen from today, it doesn't seem so radical. But at that time, perhaps it was radical enough to make the organizers of the exhibition Deconstructivism in New York in 1994 and 92 or so, to invite Frank Gehry to be part of that group. 7 architects were invited. Well, actually more, because Kopp Himmelblau also, I mean, Wolf Prix worked with his partner, but there were 5 or 7 architecture firms, and Frank Gehry was part of them. 1978, another residence. This one again, modernism without anything scandalous. The Wagner Residence, 1978. He built all kinds of works. This one was not built, but it looks interesting. Too bad it was not built. He began already to distort, to deform. And we saw the fluid deformations of Bernini. Now we look at the still geometrical deformations of Frank Gehry. But we'll arrive at his fluidities as well. The Richard and Lois Gunter Residence, 1978, again a project. But yes, he assumed the reality of architecture in, with lots of works. Some of them more courageous, others less so. Commercial works as well, predictable works, unpredictable works. He worked. The Familian Residence, Santa Monica, 1978. I like this, but too bad it was not built. But I'm beginning to like more and more his work. You know, here is a deconstruction taking place. Deconstruction which came via philosophy, Jacques Derrida, and so architecture came in a way late, and in a way justifiably so, because to the very word deconstruction, to assume it in architecture seems to be a little problematic at first, but if you think twice, you would find the reasons to understand it. Anyway, he's moving towards exuberance and towards dynamic spaces. Loyola Law School, 1978, 2002. Not afraid to assume color when necessary. I mean, I don't know if necessary, but I'm glad he used the color in this case. And it's a law school. Could a law school be, chromatically, engaging and adventurous? Why not? He clearly had aptitudes as a sculptor. There are sculptural qualities in this building. The Charles, what is this? Triplex, 1981, housing complex. Aquarium, 1981. California Airspace or Aerospace Museum, Museum of Science and Industry, 1984 in Los Angeles. If something turns me off in his architecture is that touch of pop culture and pop art that appears sometimes in his works. And but he was the product of a certain cultural climate, artistic climate on the west coast of the United States. The That I find a little bit problematic, but he was continuously, pushing the frontiers of architecture towards what he came to realize some years later. Again, Santa Monica retail complex. And whatever the skeptic might say, these contorted spaces and forms do help to create a more dynamic environment and more engaging to the street and to the users and so on. Norton House, an interesting house, a whimsical house. I like it. When was it built? 1984. 1984, already postmodernism was claiming its victims. $1995, Dallas, but it was not built. A library from 1985. A house, 1988. He began to receive commissions more and more often and larger and larger. Even this house is could easily be a museum. You see, the plan is rather generous. Another house, 1987. So on one hand, he was working towards deconstruction. On the other hand, he's using archetypal volumes, primal volumes that, in a way, are in opposition with what we understand by deconstruction. Another residence, 1989. And these are opulent houses, of course. He's there on the sofa on the right. The Schnabel residence, now the Yale Psychiatric Institute at Yale University from 1989, New Haven, Connecticut. Herman Miller factory, 1987, 1989. Why shouldn't a factory also have, express a certain joie de vivre, which is, helped by chromatic intensity. The Vitra Design Museum from 1989 in Germany, a well-known work by him. So 1989. Rockwell Engineering Center, 1990. School of Engineering. Now here there is a, I call it pop narrative architecture. To me, this is a little bit problematic, but because I think architecture should remain an abstract art, even when it attempts to become narrative. Like here is too literal, too representational, and too figurative. But he took risks, and he's still taking risks. 1992, Iowa Advanced Technology Laboratories. He built a lot. He covered the world with his buildings. Some people might complain about this, maybe with good reasons. The Disney village in France, in Ban-la-Vallée, near Paris. What can we say? It's the Disney world. Why France built a Disney World center near Paris, I don't quite know, but anyway, I actually visited it. The Olympic fish in Barcelona, 1992, he was and is, and maybe will until the end of his life, obsessed by the fish. I wonder if also in a religious sense. Yes, he loves the fish. The fish appears explicitly or implicitly in some of his works. Here, very explicitly in Barcelona. Museum of Art, University of Minnesota, 1993. Now we are approaching the, the well-known phase of Frank Gehry. Is it still deconstruction in a way? Yes, in a way, no. It's an aggregate architecture. It is as if he's recomposing architecture starting from the fragments he obtained by deconstructing in the past. Center for the Visual Arts in Toledo, Ohio, 1993. You see, this is the other side of Frank Gehry. It could also be monumental and sometimes even almost monolithical, opaque. It doesn't seem to be very attractive. Well, there are some works where glass plays an important part, but here we see the wall. The wall, almost without any penetration, is asserting itself in a rather fortress-like kind of architecture. Although here there is also glass, but let's not forget this side, or this one. So I guess he had and has dualities. This is almost like a citadel on top of the hill. Cinémathèque Française from 1994. Vitra International Headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, 1994. Frankfurt, also 1994. Germany again, 1995. California. Ice skating rink. A different kind of architecture from Frank Gehry here. Team Disney, Anaheim, California, 1996. Now, this building, the so-called dancing house, is in Prague, and I had been there, and I don't actually see it as a dancing building, but that's how it is described. To me, it's rather an anxious building, and rather, yeah, its distortions seem to be. I don't know very well why it is called a dancing building. It's that's not the feeling I had when I was near it. It's in Prague. But we see here also the aforementioned dualities, where you have one kind of architecture here and another kind of architecture here, and you have some kind of a conflict between the two. This makes me think a little bit of Maria Olbrich on the top of the secessionist building in Vienna, but more agitated somehow, almost a little bit hysterically, but there seems to be some connection. Anyway, another building in 1996, but not built. But we already, now we are beginning to see back, looking back on the presentation of today on Bernini, we are beginning to see more of a relationship between him and Frank Gehry. And now we arrive at his famous work, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao from 1997, which helped also economically Bilbao a lot until that time. This time, when the building was built, Bilbao was, had a difficult life, and this building helped it to a lot financially as well. Tourism developed. Bilbao became a destination, and cultural tourism helped the city, become more self-confident, and it worked. I have seen this building. I was there. It has qualities. Some things that bother me a little are especially the connections with what I call the pop culture and pop mentality of California, of a certain part of California. Here we see the sculpture, The Spider by Louise Bourgeois. Very remarkable sculptress from France, but living and working in the United States. Anyway, it's a famous work by Frank Gehry, even included between the 5 must be seen buildings by that Wolf Prix mentioned. When he was asked which are the 5 buildings that any architect should see, and he included the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao by Frank Gehry. He obviously took risks, and yes, after he received the Pritzker Prize, he wouldn't be, challenged not to build what he envisioned. Somehow we can still see the fish even in the plan of the building. His beloved fish. Germany, Düsseldorf. University of Cincinnati, the Academic Health Center. The year 2000s. Headquarters cafeteria in Times Square. This presentation is rather long. I'm beginning to regret that I chose to present Frank Gehry with 500 pictures after Bernini, but now I will continue until the end. Please bear with me if you are not tired. It's a quick aide-memoire of his works. This building in Berlin is, in my opinion, one of his better buildings, the Dizzy Bank, right across the street from the Holocaust memorial by Peter Eisenman. And it's a little bit more restrained in its main elevation, but the courtyard has this, again, the fish, this spectacular structure inside the courtyard. So we can see somehow reflections of Saint Teresa, the ecstasy of Saint Teresa by Bernini in some of his works. Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle. I like it when his architecture become very visceral, not just in terms of spaces and materiality, but also chromatically. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. I hear a noise in the background. Thank you. But we see the dualities here as well. On one hand, we see this fragmentation here, and on the other hand, more larger bodies of buildings. There seems to be a conflict. And this conflict maybe is the one that attracted Goethe in the Black Forest when he searched for the Ur plant, the primordial plant, which he thought had a built-in duality. And I see such dualities in some of his works, Frank Gehry's works. Gehry Tower in Hanover, in Germany, it's called the Gehry Tower. A flagship store for this important design in Manhattan. A preliminary sketch, which became reality through the works of his employees and colleagues. A School of Management in Cleveland, Ohio. Bard College, New York. Scotland, 2003. The sculpture is not by him. Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, 2003. He also designed the stage design for Mozart opera Don Giovanni inside, performed inside this very building that he designed. Los Angeles. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 2004. J. Pritzker Pavilion, the Millennium Park, Chicago. A bridge, also the Millennium Park. Germany, 2005. I'm thinking now that a possible alternative title of his work could be, some kind of imbalanced citadels, because he also uses these fortress-like walls, but they are deformed, and so I see some conflict here. On one hand, he wants some sort of stability or rigidity, but on the other hand, he wants to move away from that rigidity, and some kind of an uneasy tension between two opposite tendencies, I feel. So this is in Germany. Now, West Hollywood, 2005. There are too many works. I'm beginning to be tired of Frank Gehry. I'm sorry. This work, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Spain, is more Dionysian than others, probably appropriately, because it's about wine and winery and essentially alcohol in the proximity of the building, so getting drunk or intoxicated, and the building towards the outside is intoxicated and intoxicating, not so much inside. Yeah, so this is in Spain. Now Chelsea, New York. The building on the left is by Jean Nouvel, and I like more the building by Jean Nouvel than the building by Frank Gehry, actually. Anyway, he built it. So here is Jean Nouvel, and here is Frank Gehry. City of Wine Complex is the same. We already saw it. I don't know why it is called City of Wine Complex, but it does say something about intoxication with alcohol. Yes, a showcase, Maritza showcase at the Walt Disney Concert Hall. This is the artist Maritza, and here he is together with the artist. He loves the artists, and he works for them. He works with them. Bernini, he also worked for theater. He even played in plays that he directed and so on. Well, I don't know if Frank Gehry directed anything, but he was the architect who worked with artists and in the theater as well. Art Gallery of Ontario, 2018, 2008. So he returned to Canada with this building. Actually, from what I know, he doesn't have a lot of buildings in Canada. Maybe Canada is punishing him for leaving it. Princeton University. It could become a little bit tiring with, repeating kind of the same architectural language. Now, the Serpentine Gallery from 2008 makes me think of his own house, the one that started in 1977, the so-called Frank Gehry movement. This is in Switzerland for the pharmaceutical company Novartis, for which also Peter Markley built, and other architects. Of course, this is by Frank Gehry, another derivative architecture from his beloved paradigmatic fish. The Danish Cancer Society Counseling Center in Aarhus, Denmark, 2009, an addition to an old building. Las Vegas. But this is a building for brain health. And you wonder, you wonder if you get out of this building really healthy. It's, yeah, the building is an expression of brain turmoil, very much so. Maybe those people who lose their money at the casinos in Las Vegas would be the the expected patients in this center. We all know that book, Learning from Las Vegas. In my opinion, there is nothing to learn from Las Vegas except what not to do. Well, there is whiteness here, but besides whiteness, everything is an expression of agitation and turmoil. Another Museum of Art, 2010. New World Center, Miami Beach, 2011. Now here we finally see, an almost international style facade, regular and everything, but it's just this. But still, it's almost like a breath of fresh air all of a sudden. Inside, though, is a different story. New York by Gehry at 8th Street, Manhattan. He built this tower here. the waves of architecture, but they actually rather, cosmetically present on the facade of an otherwise almost Cartesian buildings. But these waves try to, bring some movement to the facades. It's a trend now. Other architects did it too and do it too. Hong Kong, 2011. New Orleans, Louisiana. Hong Kong, 2013. This work I like, this one in Panama City, because it's chromatically engaging. It has very vivid colors, and I think it is one of his better works. particularly because of the chromatic aspects. These primary colors, I think, are provocative and engaging. Even the plan has some you know, genuine movement and tension and conflict. So this is in Panama City. Folded architecture. Now we arrive at this building in Paris, which I visited, the Louis Vuitton Fondation pour Création, Foundation for Creation in Paris. And I have to say, at the top is very impressive. It's amazing how it was imagined and built. Just look at these structural elements and the junctions and the joints, and look at their scale, look at the workers, how to bring all these things together. Of course, it was not an inexpensive enterprise at all, but it's a forest of disturbed columns. It's a wild architecture at the top of the building. And I mean, just in itself, just which is a detail, so to speak, is an architectural event. I'm sure the cost was astronomical. Sydney, Australia, we're approaching the end of the presentation. Facebook West Campus from 2015. Here he is with Mr. Zuckerberg, looking at the site plan. A giant enterprise. Pierre Boulez Concert Hall in Berlin from 2017. This was the preliminary sketch, and it was built accordingly. Wagner Residence, his own residence now, over, you know, almost 50 years later in Santa Monica, California. We remember his own house from 1977. This is almost 50 years later. Another residence, 2018. The architect on the right, the client on the left. Now we arrive at this tower, which was completed recently, and he was inspired by the paintings of Van Gogh, who spent some years in Arles and a very fruitful time. And Some people don't like this building. I personally think that it did connect somehow with some paintings by Vincent van Gogh, and the base refers to is connected with the physical context of a Roman amphitheater which exists in Arles. But the top part of the building, the tower itself, I think it expresses the anguished temperament and life of the great painter. Right now, there is in the United States a mega show in many cities called Immersive Van Gogh. And it's kind of interesting that Van Gogh is now animating us with his genius in various ways. Here, the building by Gehry, and in many cities in the United States, the mega show Immersive Van Gogh. So this is in the south of France, in Arles, and now work from 2019. In this case, the tree is more dramatic than the building, and I'm glad it is, that it is allowed to take over, so to speak. But there are elements of Gehry which seem to compete with the tree that we just looked at. Just this building is his, not this one. Now, this is from 2020, from last year, the Eisenhower Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is a large memorial he built in Washington, D.C. Well, he's not the author of this sculptural work, but just of the building. 2017. It's a house. I don't know why I show it here now after the work for Washington, D.C. It's just too long, this presentation. Some two towers from 2021 this year in Toronto, Canada. They are still in as a project. I don't know if they started to be built. And here are many studies for the work in Arles for the tower that we just saw. And some furniture quickly. He built a lot of chairs, bent wood and other materials. I wish they were affordable with the prices, but I don't think they are. But I think he is a skillful Baroque furniture designer. Because there is such a thing as modern or Baroque modernity. experimenting, continuously experimenting, although sometimes he also repeats himself in terms of the creative strategy. And we saw already this picture with Hennessy 150, the bottle that he designed. And here he is. And maybe this is the last picture of this rather long, maybe too long presentation. Thank you.